thank you for the organizers for extending the invitation. It's a privilege to be here. I'm going to talk about the shifts and the evolution that Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb has experienced in the last decade or so. So, Operation Serval in Mali has, as you know, severely degraded the military capabilities of militant organizations. It has disrupted their organizational capacities, and it has destroyed many of their sanctuaries in northern Mali. We know that. But just as the violent extremists are being subdued in one theater of activity, new hot spots of confrontations are emerging. So frozen out of one sanctuary, transnational terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb just disappear into other peripheral zones of tension. And possibilities for expanding the threat boundaries are manifold, as are opportunities to exploit the security and political vacuums in much of North Africa. Already optimism about France's military mission in northern Mali is giving way to fears that AQIM is creeping into Libya, where it has dense connections to trafficking networks. AQIM's ambition to diversify its bases of operations extends to southern Tunisia. So far, a corridor region for arms traffickers and criminal networks connected to the Sahel. But what we're seeing is that increasingly some of these weapons are being kept for use by extremist local groups that are threatening to destabilize countries in the midst of difficult political transitions. AQIM is not the only transnational terrorist group that is attempting to stage a deadly comeback and hence to try to sustain its relevance in the Sahel, North Africa. Mujal, which is a splinter offshoot of AQIM and whose membership is primarily West African, seeks to regroup and recruit in Niger, in Mauritania, and the Polisario-controlled refugee camps in southwest Algeria. So as happened in northern Mali, the prospect of radicalization of ethno-nationalist or regionalist movements cannot be ruled out. The appeal of radical Islamism becomes enticing when it has the potential to transcend tribal fractures without undermining tribal balances and clan structures. So prospects of Al-Qaeda and its affiliates to parasite local conflicts are worrisome to regional governments and obviously to Western officials. We know that Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb is at its strongest when it engages in free-floating, deterritorialized warfare against its Western enemies. But as it learned the hard way in northern Mali, territorializing itself within a given base and then monopolizing political power was a huge miscalculation for Al-Qaeda and its allies. It made the organization unpopular and its warriors vulnerable, obviously, to French reconnaissance aircrafts and American drones. So the Mali fiasco for Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb and its allies is another reminder that terrorist movements with abstract ideas are not in the business of ruling or holding territory. Territorial grounding requires deep social connection, political purpose, and capacity, features Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb lacks. So Al-Qaeda has returned to from territorializing itself to deterritorializing itself. So its return to its original nature is a logical course of action following its strategic reversals in Mali. AQIM hopes that by going back to its original form, this will give it a new lifeline. So such mutation, such evolution is not random, right? But is characteristic of the trajectory of the organization. Since the movement was dislocated from its hubs in Algeria in the early 2000s, AQIM sought strategic grounding and relevance in the Sahel. But its internal discords, its moral schizophrenia, and its lack of strategic constraint ended up costing it its territorial entrenchment in the ill-governed spaces of Mali, prompting yet another process of transformation that takes it back to where it came from. which is North Africa. But reviving its fortunes for Al-Qaeda is a tall order for an organization that is internally divided and that is incapable of bringing meaning to its project for the region or its war against abstract enemies. Only by goading the West, the United States and others, into expanding its drone bases, its hot lists in North Africa, can Al-Qaeda's project and narrative begin to gain some purpose. Otherwise, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb would remain what it always has been, a bloody nuisance to fledgling governments in transitions, striking at Western targets when it can, and trying to exploit local conflicts to its advantage. Chaotic spaces in Libya and the difficult political transitions in Tunisia and also Algeria give the organization new breathing life to arrest or to stop or to try to stop its strategic decline and increasing ideological irrelevance. So AQIM is at crossroads today, an organization that, as one scholar put it, that was forged in reactivity and in ambiguity is faced today with its original emptiness. But this is not the first time that Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb, with the group which was GSPC and GIA before, as you know, finds itself uprooted, marginalized and drifting ideologically. We have seen this story before. After its strategic defeat in Algeria in the 1990s, the organization was in desperate need of sanctuarizing and rebranding itself. Its image was badly battered and its narrative was fragmented, it was incoherent, and it was widely discredited. Then came America's war on terrorism, 2001. The globalization of the war on terror suddenly gave an Algerian terrorist organization in decline new purpose and new focus. Embracing bin Laden's war at the time against what he called the Crusader Alliance was an opportunistic means for a rogue organization to salvage its reputation for indiscriminate slaughter of innocent civilians. At the time, bin Laden's cachet conferred respectability on militant groups. Acquiring his imprimatur in 2006 boosted the group's acceptability in radical circles. So in the midst of this search for a new incarnation, AQIM sought sanctuaries in the Sahelian hinterlands. The Maghreb at the time was difficult to penetrate, so the vast territories and the ill-governed spaces of the Sahara emerged as ideal locations for resettlement. But contrary to much conventional wisdom, however, Mali did not succumb to AQIM because of the syndrome of ungoverned spaces. This is a fallacy. Because if that was true, then Mauritania and Niger and other weak states would have suffered the same fate. But AQIM thrived in northern Mali because of the active collusion of state actors, because of the toxic relations between the center and the periphery, and because of inter and intra-ethnic competitions over drug trafficking proceeds, resources, and rights. So in other words, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb did not spread its tentacles in northern Mali in the political, economic, and the social vacuum. The organization's knack for seizing the moment, as it did in 2001, came again in 2011, when Libya erupted in a civil war, 2011. Ironically, just as the global war on terror, 2001, gave the organization a new life, the West's military assistance in terminating Gaddafi's suffocating hold over Libya opened new opportunities for AQIM to arm itself and further exacerbate insecurities in the region. Quite schizophrenically, Western governments also contributed to the growth of AQIM and its affiliates through payments of large sums of ransom money. So AQIM's streak of luck would end, as we know, in January 2013, thanks in part to its overreach in hijacking the 2012 Tuareg rebellion. AQIM's amorphous structure the factional competition of its Algerian leadership, the fluidity of its affiliates, made it almost impossible for the organization to rein in the excesses of its hard-headed emirs in Mali. As predicted by Drukgyal, the Algerian-based emir of AQIM, the zealous application of a radical form of Sharia law alienated the local population, and it mobilized international support for ending Al-Qaeda's rule of terror in northern Mali. In a letter recovered by the Associated Press after the French intervention, before the French intervention, Drukgyal warned his soldiers that previous experiences taught him, previous experiences meaning in Algeria and also in Iraq, it taught him that abrupt imposition of Sharia law in inhospitable environments will undermine religious belief, will cause a backlash against what he calls the Mujahideen, and it will inevitably lead to the defeat of their experiments. Drukgyal exhorted his commanders to make tactical ideological concessions to their adversaries and to avoid antagonizing regional neighbors. Drukgyal did not hide his frustration that his instructions were unheeded by local commanders on the ground, especially Mukhtar al-Mukhtar, MBA. So this is the fix that AQIM finds itself in today. Its shadowy nature and its unwieldiness have made its project in the Sahel unworkable. AQIM internal correspondence reveals a leadership that is deeply frustrated and that is powerless to control its operatives and execute its designs on the Sahel. So just as it happened in the 1990s, we're living the same story today. We have a hollowed out terrorist organization that is once again trying to reverse its decline. And efforts to build relationships with a diverse network of militants in North Africa are already underway. We've seen that in Libya, as I said, in southern Tunisia, and for Mujah in Niger, and in the Polisario controlled camps in Algeria. And I think I'll just stop here since I've run out of time, and we can chat later.